I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd stay after being cheated on. It's funny how you can say things like that so casually when they don't apply to you. You read stories about people in messy relationships and think, God, I'd never let that happen to me. But when it's your life, your home, your toothbrush next to his in the cup on the sink, everything changes. I met Ryan when I was 24. I was in grad school, broke, idealistic, living on iced coffee and second-hand furniture. He worked in marketing, older by a few years, the kind of man who made you feel like the world was slightly more organized when he walked into a room. He had that charisma that didn't announce itself. It just settled in quietly until you were looking at him longer than you meant to. He said all the right things. About wanting a future, about valuing honesty, about never playing games. We moved in together after a year. The apartment was small but warm, the kind of place where you could hear the neighbors' music through the walls, where we painted one of the rooms a soft green and pretended we were adults who knew what we were doing. We had rituals. Sunday mornings with pancakes. Late-night walks when the city was still and soft. I used to think love was just a steady hum, like background music, nothing dramatic, just comfortable. Then about 3 years in, something shifted. Not a crash, not a fight, just silence. He was distracted, always tired. His phone was glued to him in ways it hadn't been before. It started with small things, texts he'd tilt the screen away for, unexplained late nights, that kind of restless energy people get when they're lying. I asked him once softly, like I was afraid of the answer. Are you seeing someone else? He laughed, the way people do when they're cornered but pretending they're not. Of course not, he said, kissing my forehead. I wanted to believe him so badly that I did, until I couldn't anymore. It was an accident, how I found out. A message popped up on his laptop one night while he was in the shower. Her name was Emily. The message wasn't explicit, not yet, but the tone was enough. That flirtatious shorthand people fall into when they've crossed a line they can't uncross. I didn't open the full chat. I just stared at the preview until the words blurred. I remember feeling quiet. Not angry, not yet, just hollow. When he came out of the shower, I asked him again, Are you sleeping with someone else? He froze, and I saw it, that flicker of panic before the lie. That was all the confirmation I needed. He admitted it eventually, piece by piece, said it wasn't serious, said it just happened, said he was confused and didn't want to hurt me. The usual script, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything. I just sat there and listened until he ran out of excuses. He slept on the couch that night. The next morning, I went to work like nothing happened. Answered emails, made small talk, kept breathing. That's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't stop the world. You still have to pay bills, smile at coworkers, remember passwords. I didn't leave him, not right away. I told myself I just needed time to decide, but really I was scared. Scared of starting over, of being 30 and alone, of wasting years on someone who wasn't real. And somewhere, buried under all that fear, there was still love, or at least the memory of it. He swore it was over with her, deleted her number, made promises, cried, and maybe I wanted to believe that version of him more than I wanted the truth, so I stayed. But here's the thing about staying after someone breaks you. It doesn't really fix anything. It just teaches you how to live with a crack that never fully heals. Months passed. We went to therapy. We tried to rebuild trust. But every time his phone buzzed, my stomach turned. Every time he said he was working late, I'd feel that old panic crawl back up my throat. It was like living with a ghost, the version of him I used to know haunting the man in front of me. And then, one night, I met someone else. He wasn't supposed to be anyone important, just a stranger in a bar. I'd gone out with coworkers, trying to prove, to them, to myself, that I was fine. It was one of those rooftop places where the music is too loud for real conversation, where the city glows like it's pretending to be romantic. I hadn't planned on talking to anyone, but he was standing next to me when I ordered another drink, and he smiled like he already knew something about me. His name was Daniel. He asked if I wanted to sit outside, and I said yes because the air inside was heavy, and because I didn't want to think about why I kept checking my phone, waiting for Ryan to text me. Daniel had this calm about him, an ease that felt dangerous, like he wasn't trying to impress me. He listened. That's what got me. He listened like what I said mattered. We talked about work, about the city, about how people in their late 20s pretend to be happy all the time. He asked if I was seeing someone, and I hesitated before saying, kind of. He smiled at that, not judgmental, just knowing. He said, that sounds complicated, and I laughed. When I got home that night, I sat in the dark kitchen and thought about how it felt to talk to someone who didn't make me feel like I was constantly bracing for disappointment. It scared me. Daniel and I saw each other again a week later, then again and again. It started as coincidence and turned into routine. Coffee before work, walks after. He wasn't pushy. He didn't even flirt, not really. But there was an energy between us, something unspoken that grew each time. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself that if Ryan could betray me and we were still together, then I was allowed to have someone to talk to. Someone to make me feel human again. But the line between emotional comfort and infidelity is thinner than anyone wants to admit. It happened one evening after I'd had a fight with Ryan about his phone again. Something small, something stupid. But it tore open everything we hadn't healed. I left the apartment just to breathe, ended up walking without thinking, and before I realized it, I was outside Daniel's building. He didn't ask questions when he saw me, just opened the door. We sat on his couch. I told him I couldn't do this, that I wasn't this kind of person. He said, "You don't have to explain anything." But he looked at me like he already understood the whole story, like he'd been waiting for me to stop pretending. When he kissed me, I didn't stop him. I thought I'd feel guilt immediately, but what I felt instead was relief. Not joy, not passion, just the quiet realization that I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally exhaling. I went home that night and stood in the shower until the water ran cold. I tried to scrub him off me. But what I really wanted to erase was the part of myself that had crossed that line. I didn't sleep. Ryan came home late, kissed me on the forehead, and whispered, "You okay?" like nothing was broken. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. Daniel didn't push for more. He didn't ask me to leave Ryan or make promises. He just existed quietly in the background of my life. We'd see each other sometimes, talk, pretend we weren't building something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't love, but it wasn't nothing either. It was an escape hatch, a small window where I could remember who I used to be. And then, one night, Ryan found out. It wasn't even dramatic. He saw a text, something simple like, "You made today easier." He asked who Daniel was, and I told him the truth. Maybe because I was tired of lying, or maybe because I wanted him to finally see me, the version of me that had stopped waiting to be chosen. He didn't yell, didn't cry, just stared at me for a long time and said, "Now we're even." Those words broke me in a way his affair never did, because they weren't angry, they were resigned. Like love had turned into an equation, a balance sheet of betrayal, 1-for-1. We tried again to patch things up. Therapy, dinners, forced intimacy, but everything had curdled. I'd see him and feel both guilt and indifference. I'd think about Daniel and feel both comfort and shame. I started realizing that maybe the real damage wasn't the cheating, it was the slow erosion of who I was beneath it all. Months went by. Ryan started looking at me like a stranger in his own home. One morning, over coffee, he said, "Do you even want to keep trying?" And I didn't answer because the truth was no, but I didn't know how to say it out loud. That night, he packed a bag and said he'd stay with a friend. We didn't fight. There were no tears, no scenes, just a quiet agreement that whatever we'd been holding onto had finally slipped through our fingers. After he left, I sat on the couch and tried to remember the first time I loved him, the first time I believed in us. But all I could picture was that moment when he said, "Now we're even." Daniel texted a few days later. I didn't answer. I think part of me knew that whatever I was looking for in him was just another version of the same ache. The need to feel seen, loved, forgiven. But maybe some wounds aren't meant to heal with someone else's touch. It's been months since then. The apartment is quiet. I still catch myself setting out 2 mugs in the morning sometimes, still find his shirts in the back of drawers. But I've learned that loneliness isn't the worst thing. It's staying in a life that no longer fits. Some nights I walk past the places we used to go. The city looks different now. Softer somehow. Or maybe it's just me. I don't know if I'll ever be the same person I was before all of this, but I think that's okay. Because maybe healing isn't about going back to who you were. Maybe it's about finally meeting the version of yourself that survived. The first time I saw Daniel again, it was by accident. 6 months had passed since everything fell apart. I'd switched apartments, new job, new haircut, the kind of changes people make when they're trying to prove they're fine. I was grabbing coffee before work, the place near the subway that always smelled like burnt espresso and rain-soaked coats, and there he was, standing in line, holding the same paperback he'd always read on his lunch breaks. For a second, I froze. Then he looked up, and there it was, the flicker of recognition, the small, tired smile that said, "Oh, you're still here." We said hello like old friends do, polite and uncertain. He asked how I'd been, and I lied, said good. He nodded, told me he'd moved. That work was busy. Small talk between two people who used to know how each other's skin tasted. It was surreal, standing there with the hum of espresso machines and the rain tapping against the window, pretending we hadn't broken pieces of ourselves together. He asked if I wanted to sit, and I almost said no. But something in me, nostalgia, curiosity, maybe loneliness, said yes. We sat by the window, the same spot where we used to meet when it was all secret and wrong. He looked older somehow, not in a bad way, just softer, less sure. He asked if I still lived with Ryan. I said no, and he didn't press. He just nodded slowly like he already knew the answer. Then he said, "I'm sorry for how everything went. I should have stopped it before it got messy." I didn't know what to say to that. Sorry felt too small for what we'd done, for what I'd become. I told him, "It's not on you. I made my choices." And I meant it. The thing about getting distance is you start realizing that blame doesn't change anything. We were two people who met at the wrong time, trying to fill holes that couldn't be filled by each other. We talked for over an hour, about books, about work, about nothing that mattered. And then he said, "You seem different." I smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes. I had to be. When we stood to leave, he asked if I wanted to see him again. My heart twisted, but not the way it used to. There was that ache, that electricity, just a quiet, sad affection for what we once were. I told him, "I don't think so." He didn't argue, just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You were always braver than you thought." And then he left. After that, something shifted in me. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't feel that pull to look back. I realized that closure doesn't come from a perfect ending. It comes from choosing not to reopen the wound. That night, I went home and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The woman who believed in forever, the one who begged for answers, the one who broke her own rules to feel something again. I didn't hate any of them. I just finally saw them for what they were, steps in the long, messy process of growing up. I started writing again. Not for anyone else, just for me. Little notes about the things I was learning, how silence can be peaceful instead of painful, how you can love someone deeply and still know they're not your person, how forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else. It's something you give to yourself when you're tired of carrying the weight. A few weeks later, Ryan reached out. An email of all things, just a short message. "I hope you're doing okay. I'm sorry for how I hurt you." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I hope you're okay too. We did what we could." And that was it. No anger, no unfinished business. Just two people acknowledging the wreckage and walking away from it. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about what love means. Not the movie version, the real kind. The kind that grows quietly, breathes, falters, survives, or doesn't. I think maybe love isn't supposed to be forever. Maybe it's meant to change us, to burn through the lies we tell ourselves until we're left with something honest. The last thing Daniel said to me stuck. "You were always braver than you thought." I don't know if I believe that yet, but I do know that I wake up alone and the air feels lighter. I drink my coffee slowly. I walk to work without checking my phone. I make dinner for one and play music too loud. I sleep in the middle of the bed. And every morning, when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I see a woman who looks like she finally came home to herself. Not perfect, not healed, but whole enough. And maybe that's what all of this was about. Not punishment or redemption, not even forgiveness. Just the long, difficult journey back to my own life. Maybe love didn't save me. Maybe losing it did. It's strange, the way life keeps moving even after you think you've reached the end of something. Months turned into a year, and I stopped measuring time by the milestones of pain. I no longer counted how many days since Ryan left or how many nights I'd gone without thinking of Daniel. The ache softened, not gone, but dulled, like a bruise fatting beneath the skin. I started seeing the city again, really seeing it, without every street corner being a reminder. The bakery on 5th stopped being where we had brunch. The park bench was where he said he loved me. It was just a park bench, ordinary again, and that ordinariness felt like freedom. I moved apartments one more time. Smaller, quieter. The walls were thin, and I could hear the couple next door argue about laundry and kiss afterward like nothing happened. It didn't make me sad, it made me human again. I painted one wall yellow just to have something bright to wake up to. I started leaving the window open at night. I slept better. I didn't flinch when I heard a phone buzz. Sometimes I'd scroll through old photos. I didn't delete them, I just stopped pretending I'd ever forget. Memory isn't the enemy, it's the teacher that stays behind after everyone else leaves. There were good things, even inside all the breaking. The way Ryan would laugh into my neck, the way Daniel would trace circles on my palm when I was anxious. Those moments were real, but they weren't enough. And that's okay. Love doesn't have to be forever to mean something. One Sunday morning, I ran into Ryan again. It wasn't planned and it wasn't cinematic. Just the grocery store, the fluorescent kind that smells faintly of oranges and detergent. He was in the next aisle, staring at pasta sauce like it held the answers to life. I could have turned around, but I didn't. I walked up to him, smiled, said his name. He blinked, startled, then smiled too, soft, careful, the way people do when they aren't sure if they're welcome. He looked older, tired, but peaceful. There was a ring on his finger. He caught me glancing and said, "Yeah, last year." I nodded. "I'm happy for you," and I meant it. I think we both knew that version of us, the one who loved, who hurt, who tried, had run its course. We stood there for a few minutes, talking about nothing that mattered. Work weather, small things that used to be big. When we said goodbye, he touched my arm and said, "You look good, you look okay." And I was. When I got home, I cried, not because I missed him, but because I didn't. Because for the first time, the story felt finished. I wasn't angry or nostalgic or waiting for anything. It was just quiet inside me. That night, I went through my old journal, the one I started during the worst of it. The pages were messy, ink smudged from tears, words scribbled in frustration. But near the end, there was an entry I didn't remember writing. It said, "One day, this won't feel like a punishment. It'll just be a part of the story." I think that day finally came. Spring arrived early that year. The air smelled like rain and lilacs. I started walking again, the long way home, through streets I hadn't visited in years. The city had changed, new cafes, new buildings, but I still recognized the pulse of it. Life doesn't erase what came before, it just layers itself on top until the pain becomes part of the landscape. I stopped at the bridge where I used to meet Daniel sometimes, the one overlooking the river that looked golden at sunset. I stood there for a while, watching the light catch the water. It wasn't longing I felt, just gratitude. Gratitude that he'd seen me when I needed to be seen, even if it wasn't meant to last. Gratitude that I'd learned what I could survive. There was no big revelation, no perfect epiphany. Just a slow, steady realization that healing isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It's the small things. The coffee you make in the morning because you like it that way, the text you don't send, the nights you sleep through without dreaming of them. It's the sound of your own laugh after months of silence. It's looking at yourself in the mirror and not flinching at what you see. Sometimes I still wonder what version of me Ryan or Daniel remembers. Probably not this one. Probably not the woman who learned how to exist without being chosen, who stopped needing someone else's love to feel whole. But that's okay, because I remember her now. The girl who stayed, the woman who left, the one who broke, who cheated, who forgave, who grew. They're all me. And maybe that's the point, that none of us are one thing forever. We're a collection of mistakes and lessons and soft beginnings. I think about that when I walk home alone, when I make dinner for one and light a candle just because. I think about it when I pass couples arguing on the street and know that love isn't perfect, but it's still worth believing in. I think about it when I close my eyes at night and realize I'm not lonely. I'm peaceful. If there's anything I've learned, it's that some endings don't destroy you. They return you to yourself. And maybe, after everything, that's the most honest kind of love there is.